Hey everyone, so Chop back in the video, and today we are going over the top 10 worst abilities in the game. Now, most of these characters are going to be characters you're not going to want to build, but there are some of the reasons why we don't want to build them is because of these abilities. Side note, I did get the green screen and new lighting all set up, so hopefully this looks better. I think it looks pretty clear, but let me know what you think in the comments, and let's jump into some of those abilities. All right, we are going to jump into some of the abilities here, and we're going to start off with the Chris's faction. Now, a couple things before we start talking about all the abilities. I left off all the traits on this because there's a lot of bad traits, and I don't really think they qualify as an ability. Oftentimes, they do something extra to their abilities. The other thing is that we did not include any basic abilities on this list. Really sticking to specials, ultimates, and passives, anything like that when we're talking about characters. Also, I noticed that you can see all of my hair now. It's a little crazy due to the actual green screen versus the virtual one, so there you go. But we're going to start off with Goobak here. This is someone who generally no one ever has a use for him, unless you're talking about some random arena use. But we're going to be talking about a special ability here. This is a 5-turn cooldown ability, dealing 100% damage plus 1 poison for 2 turns, with a 30% chance for an extra poison. This ability is just so mediocre. You have 1 poison, which generally he's not being used, where poison is very solid. And then he doesn't have enough poison to be able to be used, where poison would be really good. And then, of course, the damage multiplier is super low. So whether or not you're building him for damage, this isn't really going to do a lot of damage. You'd rather just use the basic, because this one has a chance to ignore defense. Even though it's a low chance, it has a chance. And then you just don't really care about the poison unless you are in a dungeon, but you don't really want to be running it because it's only 1 poison. So I'd really like to see this get 2 poisons guaranteed all the time, or just up the damage multiplier and maybe reduce the cooldown to like 3 turns or 4 turns. Goobak needs a lot to make him work in PvE and PvP right now, so I'd like to see this changed a little bit to include some of those things. But the next one up on our list is going to be a Kooby here. And a lot of people that watch my content know that I am very against using a Kooby. I think that he has a interesting kit, but the problem is that his ultimate skill here, the demonic flora, just is way too RNG based. I think it is literally one of the worst skills in the game, because it can literally do almost nothing for you, because you have someone who's going to be a support type character stacking a lot of focus and defensive stats, and yet you have 2 debuffs that could be applied randomly that require you to be scaling off of attack. So now, in order to get value out of bleeding and ignite, which are generally not very good, you need to be stacking attack, but then poison is just max HP damage, so it's just super awkward. I'd like to see this either hit a certain debuff once you apply a certain circumstance. Like, let's just say, oh, if a Kooby's attack is up a certain point, you will be applying bleeds or ignites, or if your HP is a certain point, you'd be applying a poisons. Now, I will note that if you can guarantee a poison every hit, he instantly becomes one of the best poisoners in the game. But at this point, like, yes, poisons are very strong, but is it a bad thing for a Kooby to be a desirable option for poisoners? I think that it's probably not a bad idea at this point, even though poisons are extremely strong, because generally if you get Gangello, you're going to be running Gangello. He's not going to be replacing. You're going to be running Gangello and Santis. A Kooby's not going to take one of their slots, and so now you could just run like Santis and a Kooby instead of Santis and Valuk or something, perhaps. And I think that could be very interesting, especially since he's got a really good skill here. But I think that could be interesting. Maybe it's too broken, but I do think he needs a little bit of love. Next up is going to be Kyle. And this guy is so unfortunate because his ultimate is one of the coolest abilities in the game. You copycat someone's abilities. The problem here is that you cannot copy bosses, so he's not really good in PvE. You cannot copy elites, so he's generally can't even use his ultimate in PvE content unless it's Void Tower. And then even if you do copy someone really strong in Void Tower, you don't get their stats. And I think that's a really, really easy way to fix Kyle or make him very, very viable in a lot of pieces of content, is to have him copy the stats of the enemy character. I don't think that that's necessarily super broken. I think that, you can maybe even extend the cooldown a little bit longer if you need be. But the problem here is that really his only use right now is to copy Winstrex. And if you have a Winstrex, this use is completely negated because he is just slower than Winstrex. So it's really unfortunate to see Kyle here because you just don't really want him on your squad. He can't copy the damage dealers. He can't get some really, really strong combinations. You're only going to use him for those utility skills. I'd like to see him be able to copy the stats as well. I think that'd be really, really interesting, as well as being able to copy elite units. I'm not sure why that's not a thing. I don't think that's broken at all. But we're going to move on to the next character here in Soul Plunders, and I'm sure many of you expected an Abaddon on this list. His ultimate's actually not that bad. I actually think the fact that you can prolong the stat reduction effects by 1 turn and dealing 250% damage is not bad at all. The thing that I really want changed is this second ability. It's just so poor. 120% damage. It's such a bland skill. 3-turn cooldown. 120% damage on an AoE is not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. But the healing part of it is almost negligible. Like, you're not going to be healing a lot. And then even if you are, he's generally going to get one shot anyways. If you're using him in the content that you're generally going to be using him in, unless it's Guild Boss, I guess that little bit of healing could help out a little bit. But this is just such a lame ability, in my opinion. I'd love to see an additional debuff on this skill. Something like, okay, applies attack down, or applies defense down. I think if you have, okay, applies defense down 2 on an AoE, he instantly becomes a super viable debuff, putting out debuffs as well as himself scaling off his own debuffs, and he can set up for your other teammates. I think that could be very, very interesting. And he is an LD legendary for the fact that he has some of the worst abilities in the game and worst damaging in the game. It's just really sad to see him as an LD legendary, but definitely a poor ability there. Next one is actually going to be Santis. Now, this one I wouldn't say is a absolute terrible ability. The problem is that her other abilities are so good, this ability is very bad, generally, because we want to turn off her skills. And the real reason we want to turn off her skills is because this second ability does not apply a poison. So all the other abilities in her kit apply a poison. If this ability applies a poison, we'd be using Santis' skills for the majority of the time. But due to her not applying a poison, you need to go about 13 rounds in a battle, from what I've calculated, assuming you're using the ultimate first on that wave, in order for you to get more value out of her skills being on than it being off. And that's due to her second ability not applying that poison, but her ultimate actually extends the duration and applies a poison. So basically, this ultimate is just a better basic for applying poisons, but because of that second skill only duplicating instead of putting a poison, it makes it really, really rough. Now, this ability can be really useful if you are hitting multiple units, but generally you're going to turn off Santis' skills, and then this ability and the ultimate don't really get much use in general. So pretty poor ability in regards to Santis' kit. Next up is going to be Helmar, and this guy has, I think, the lowest damage multiplier skill on one of the worst characters with one of the worst debuffs in the game. I'm not sure anyone, from what I remember going through the damage chart, I think this is literally the lowest multiplier on a skill. It's a 50% damage multiplier. Ignore the fact that bleeding, the debuff, is actually quite bad. You're going to be stacking a lot of attack on this guy because you want bleeds to scale. So even if bleeds were excellent, 50% damage is going to deal nothing. So you're completely relying on the bleeds. And unfortunately, the bleeds don't do too much. So if you do factor in the fact that bleeds don't do a lot, this skill hits for literally nothing. It's going to hit for so low because his base attack isn't even that high. And then the 50% damage multiplier is not going to get you anywhere. And then the bleeds aren't going to get you anywhere. So it's really unfortunate to have such a low multiplier. I get that he's supposed to be some sort of bleeding type character and apply a bunch of bleeds, but it doesn't hurt you to just increase this multiplier to 100%, for example, and maybe give him some other love, because he does have this passive where you have a chance to hit with the special ability. So if this special ability had 100% damage multiplier, this trait instantly becomes a much better trait because you're now hitting with this bonus attack with a higher multiplier. And I think that's why they made it low, because they didn't want it to be broken. But this guy's so bad, I think you can get away with increasing his multiplier by at least a double. So definitely want to see that. Next up is going to be Virgil, and this guy's interesting because I think he's an actual excellent character. We have a few excellent characters like Santis and Virgil on this list, but the thing with Virgil is that he's a debuffer. You're using him for the basic Dispel, you're using him for the Arcane Sanction, you're using him for the Silence, and then you have this second skill, which is 100% damage, and then perhaps 200% damage if they're affected by Silence. You're not going to be building him with attack. Even if you are building him with attack, his base attack is 847. Such a low base attack. You're not going to get almost any damage out of this guy. You need to build focus, you need to build speed, and then you build attack. If you're building all those stats, you're going to get such a low attack that this skill is not going to do almost any damage. I'd love to see this skill perhaps maybe clear a positive status effect, or maybe extend debuffs by 1 turn, something like that that kind of fits in with the skill set that he already has, instead of kind of having an outlier skill here where you're just dealing like mediocre damage, even if they are affected by Silence. Unfortunately, he is just not a damage dealer. This skill almost does nothing. So that is Virgil. The next one up is going to be Hassel here. Now, this guy actually doesn't have too crazy good abilities in general. I think you could literally put his entire kit on this list. His special isn't that bad. 20% max HP heal with crit resistance up is pretty okay. But really, we're going to be focusing on this ultimate. The problem with this is that he has such a contradictory kit. His basic applies Ignite, which scales off attack. His ultimate is based off of max HP scaling, and so you have to build attack to make Ignite work, even though Ignite is terrible. Then you have to build max HP to make this skill work, but the max HP scaling is super bad. As you remember from my previous video, this guy was hitting for like 4k on like 30k HP. It's so atrocious. Not only that, but his debuff is so bad. You know what? Something is a really easy change that may increase his viability in like Tulpa or something. Change this crit rate down to defense down 2. Instantly, this ability is one of the better abilities in the game. Defense down 2 is rare, and he is a fire character. Defense down is a critical debuff for Tulpa. I could see this being an excellent skill if this just had defense down for maybe 2 turns, 3 turns, something like that. I think it could be very excellent. But the fact that it scales off max HP, it doesn't even scale well, and you want to build an attack for Ignite, it's just super awkward. Next one is going to be Mila here, and Mila's a little awkward because you want her to be like some sort of support damage dealing debuffer with the Frozens, but her multipliers aren't that good. And then on top of that, her base attack is really low for being an attacker type unit. And then you have this second skill. She's going to AoE apply the Frozens if she gets them. And then the second skill comes in and she does basically nothing. This is literally just a filler skill to try to apply more Frozens. I'd love to see this skill be like, deal 100% damage to an enemy, and then an additional 100% damage if they're affected by Frozen. Make it literally work with her own kit, instead of getting this granting a shield type nonsense, or maybe even have it even more damage, or perhaps spread freezes, like, okay, if this target's affected by freeze, transfer that freeze to someone else, or something like that, something interesting with freezes. Because really you have this ultimate where it's scaling off negative effects, which doesn't even scale very well, and then you just don't really do much. Like, you're literally using the abilities to just try to apply Frozen. You're not doing a lot of damage, and you're not even applying that much Frozen. It's very awkward. I'd love to see her do a little bit more damage, and I think she's a lot more viable if that ends up happening. Then we have the last character on the list here, and that is Harbeg. Now, this guy actually has a really solid ultimate ability. It does a lot of damage. The only problem is that he completely relies on this rage mechanic. It expends 6 rage, right? And you have 9 rage capped. So then the only way to get rage is to just end your turn or begin a new turn, or this second ability, which is the most atrocious ability in the entire game, in my opinion. This ability is literally why I think Harbeg is so awful. When we were testing him, we literally just saw him with the trying to get the ultimate to work, and it actually wasn't that bad, as we saw. The problem is, if you go past the first, second rounds, he's literally sitting there wasting a turn, granting himself 2 rage, and then between him taking this turn and then another turn to get the ultimate off, you're going to have 8 rage. You're not even getting the full rage bar by using this ability in the matter of 2 turns. I'd love to see this be grant 3 rage and a bonus turn. Immediately grants a bonus turn or something like that, and give it a cooldown of like 3 turns or something, or 2 turns or whatever, instead of having it just a random basic ability on top of his basic ability, which doesn't have a cooldown. So I'd love to see this get a bonus turn. I think it could actually be very viable if it gets a bonus turn. On top of that, like, side note, this basic is the worst basic in the game. Expends 2 rage, deal 50% damage to an enemy. Like, what is this basic? It actually is the most triggering basic in the entire game. That is just a side note there, but yeah, definitely get a bonus turn for this special ability. I think it could be very, very viable. Pop the bonus ability or bonus turn, you're going to cycle back around to that ultimate, deal big damage, and then you're going to transfer back to the basic, maybe for 1 turn downtime, and you can get triple ultimates out, and he can actually do quite a bit of damage with the triple ultimate. So that'll be it for this video and what I think about the top 10 worst abilities in the game. But if you enjoyed this video and you want to see the top 10 abilities in the game, what I think are the best abilities, let me know in the comments down below. Let me also know what you think about the new green screen. You can see my whole body here. It doesn't disappear into the virtual green screen. I think it looks pretty clear. I'm excited. And that'll be it for this video. I'll see you for the next one.